Hi YouTube, welcome to another edition of Horror Hands, and this is going to be episode 3 in our series looking through the greatest horror characters throughout the decades. This time we're up to the 1970s. You know this one's going to be a good one. Let's get straight into it. Okay, in at number 10, I've kind of thought a little bit out the box on this one, because here we have a character who's actually an inanimate object, but they were so good they've made it onto this list. So in at number 10 we have Fats the dummy from Magic from 1978. So Fats is the ventriloquist dummy belonging to Anthony Hopkins' character, and they do shows and things like that. But Fats may or may not have more of a life than what you realise. And you kind of go into this film thinking, okay, it's going to be about a ventriloquist dummy that comes to life, and it's going to be scary, it's going to be creepy. And yes, but there's so much more to Fats in this movie than what you might realise. His character in this is really quite deep, and for an inanimate ventriloquist dummy, he really does steal the scenes, and his character really comes over. It's really quite impressive. And there are times when you watch scenes in Magic and you think to yourself, who is really in control? Is it Anthony Hopkins or is it Fats? And the way they get that across just through having him on screen and just the little looks that he gives and things like that is really, really clever. If you've seen Magic, hopefully you'll know what I'm talking about. If you're scoffing at the fact that I picked a dummy as my number 10 pick on this list, definitely give Magic a try. It's a really good film, and that performance by Fats is incredible. So in at number 10 we have Fats from Magic. In at number 9 we have Mr. Grimsdyke, played by Peter Cushing in Tales from the Crypt from 1972. Peter Cushing making the list again. That's him appearing on every single decade so far. And in this one, Mr. Grimsdyke, he only plays a small part in one of the Tales from the Crypt segments, but it's a really memorable one, and one that's quite bittersweet. This is one of the forays into horror that you don't watch for the blood and the gore and the gruesomeness. It's got a real kind of emotive, evocative feel to this one, and it's one that's always stayed with me. And Mr. Grimsdyke is this kind of really kindly old man. He's widowed, lives by himself, and lives in this house where he's lived for decades. And the people across the way who are very wealthy, but really mean-spirited, they play a cruel prank on him, which has fatal consequences. But it's not the last we see of Mr. Grimsdyke, and I'll leave it there. But other than to add that Mr. Grimsdyke, his return in this segment is one of the greatest scenes in horror you'll ever see. One of the best set pieces I've ever seen done in film. Everything from the look of it, the look of the graveyard, the foggy surroundings, Mr. Grimsdyke's makeup, it suited Peter Cushing really well. It is one of the greatest things you'll ever see in horror. So if you're a horror fan and just want to see an incredibly well put together scene, check out that segment, Valentine's Day in Tales from the Crypt with Mr. Grimsdyke. It's fantastic. But yeah, this is always, I thought, just a really well realised character, played wonderfully again by Peter Cushing, and a very memorable one from this kind of slew of Amicus anthologies. So in at number 9 we have Mr. Grimsdyke from Tales from the Crypt. In at number 8 we have Jennifer Hills, played by Camilla Keaton in I Spit on Your Grave from 1978. So yeah, the notorious rape revenge movie. And I've got to start by saying Camilla Keaton, she really does put a shift in this movie. She does really well in what must have been a very challenging role. And Jennifer Hills, I think, is a great character. She's got something about her. I think she's there writing, so she's got like a purpose. She's not just a cardboard character that turns up to get violated. We sort of find out why she's there and learn a bit about her, and then she goes through that awful ordeal in a horribly convincing way, and then of course gets her gruesome revenge. And it's just kind of one of them films where you're just rooting for her the whole way through. I also really like the scene in I Spit on Your Grave. I think it's quite understated. The scene where just before she goes on her murderous revenge rampage, she actually goes to the church to kind of sort of ask for forgiveness for what she's about to do. I always thought that was a nice touch in the film, and kind of represented to me that the character of Jennifer Hills, and in fact the movie itself, it knows it's becoming this reprehensible monster, but there's still a person under there. There's still the awareness and the conscience and things like that that she has, even though she is about to perpetrate these horrific acts. It just adds a nice bit of nuance to her character. And again, just a very memorable movie, memorable performance, and played really well by Camilla Keaton. So in at number 8, we have Jennifer Hills from I Spit on Your Grave. In at number 7, we have Dr. Phibes, played by Vincent Price in The Abominable Dr. Phibes from 1971. Vincent Price, again, making the list every decade so far. And I had to include Dr. Phibes because for me as a very young kid, Dr. Phibes was one of the very first kind of horror characters that I ever came across. I watched the movie, I don't know where I got it from or how I came across it, but I watched the movie, loved the movie, was fascinated by Dr. Phibes. My dad would have sort of filled me in on Vincent Price and who he was and that kind of thing. And it really was one of my very first forays into horror, and kind of opened that door for the appreciation I had for these kind of things, for like Vincent Price's portrayal, the colours, the cinematography, the quirky British humour that's in it as well. And it's one of those films where it's not overly gruesome or nasty. So at that age, as a kid, I just kind of marvelled at all the weird and creative deaths that Dr. Phibes came up with. Yeah, he absolutely fascinated me when I was younger. And as I say, Dr. Phibes was one of the very first horror characters that I came to know and love. It's been a long time since I've seen the movie, but I still have that appreciation for that character and just how kind of weird and strange and offbeat he always came across to me when I watched it all those years ago. So yeah, in at number 7, we have Dr. Phibes from The Abominable Dr. Phibes. In at number 6, we have Quint, played by Robert Shaw in Jaws from 1975. I am actively trying not to talk about Jaws on this channel, as I'm sure most of you know. It's my favourite movie, but I don't want to get into the mire of talking about the same film over and over again. But I had to include Quint on this list. Robert Shaw's performance as Quint is just incredible. He is just commands the scenes. He's pretty crazy, pretty intimidating at times as well, and quite overbearing in his just eccentricity, but at the same time incredibly likeable, which is a hard thing to pull off. And I just kind of really like, well, because I watch Jaws all the time, and Quint is probably the character who I think is actually the most kind of layered and mysterious, and I still get things from Quint's character on repeated viewings of Jaws, particularly the kind of that dark aspect he had of the USS Indianapolis sinking, and the sort of unhealthy obsession he has with sharks and fishing for sharks, and this underlying sense of revenge that he has. It's an interesting exploration of the darker side of his character, and something that seems to govern his somewhat crazy motives throughout the film. And again, all just encapsulated by this wonderful performance from Robert Shaw. So in at number 6, we have Quint from Jaws. In at number 5, we have Ellen Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver in Alien in 1979. Was tempted to bump her up the list a little bit, but I think this was Ripley just starting out. She's not become sort of the amazing alien warrior lady that she would become in the later films, but this is certainly a great start for her and a wonderful performance by Sigourney Weaver. And even in this early film, you kind of get the sense of her sort of taking the lead against the alien, particularly in the final third of the film, doing battle against it, trying to outwit it, and just sort of being really against it, but fighting back against this terrifying creature, especially towards the end when it's kind of lurking away in the walls and things like that. She's so ill-equipped. I mean, she's not even fully dressed. She's so ill-equipped to face this creature, but somehow manages to overcome it and defeat it. It's a really good example of just sort of defying the odds. And of course, she went on to the other films and became an absolute icon and one of the greatest female characters in cinema. So yeah, in at number 5, we have Ellen Ripley from Alien. In at number 4, we have Dr. Loomis, played by Donald Pleasence in Halloween in 1978. Part really restrained performance by an experienced actor on a low-budget film, and then at times just going off onto crazy rambling rants, which Donald Pleasence often did in his movies anyway. But Dr. Loomis was a great character, very captivating on screen. I love that he was just dead set on capturing Michael Myers. He had to stop Michael Myers. He cannot articulate enough how evil Michael Myers is, and he just has to catch him, there and then. And that really kind of beefed up the scary mythos of Michael Myers, and really kind of compounded the seriousness of having this kind of mysterious killer on the loose, all sort of rooting back to Donald Pleasence and his quite inspired descriptions of Michael Myers. And it's just great to see Donald Pleasence in a movie like this and playing that kind of character. I was very close to putting Michael Myers on the list. He is absolutely iconic in horror, but I just feel in Halloween it's probably Dr. Loomis that steals the show slightly more. So in at number 4, we have Dr. Loomis from Halloween. In at number 3, we have Leatherface, played by Gunnar Hansen in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. And again, another really iconic horror character. Leatherface is awesome. He's a frustrating one because the sequels and this franchise is so inconsistent in terms of quality. And as well, they've never managed to kind of recreate sort of this Leatherface that we got in the first movie. He's always seemed a bit more manufactured in the later films, whereas this Leatherface was just raw and dirty and just looked frighteningly realistic, devoid of any real kind of character traits or anything like that. He was just kind of this sort of giant guy, not much of a sort of motive or anything about him really. He was just sort of thrown into this situation and acted out in his violent ways. And it's kind of really, it's only the first half of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the apron wearing shirt and tie Leatherface, that I absolutely love. I mean, that to me is just so scary and realistic. And yeah, although in the grand scheme of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that Leatherface only has a small bit of screen time, for me it's just absolutely iconic and so effective in horror. So yeah, in at number 3, we have Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In at number 2, we have Carrie White, played by Sissy Spacek in Carrie from 1976. And Carrie is a very interesting horror film in the sense that it's not one that I watch for the gore or the spectacle or to see crazy deaths or anything like that. It is very much a character-driven story, all centered around the character of Carrie and what goes on with her. And it's really quite a beautiful story, quite bittersweet and tragic in a way. I think it couldn't have been the great film that it was. Fortunately, in the hands of like Brian De Palma, he brings his style and his skill to it, and the result is a fantastic film. But yeah, I always it's a hard one to describe with Carrie because, as I say, there's no kind of upbeat spectacle about it. It is quite a sad story, but Sissy Spacek really does play it fantastically well. It's hard to watch her go through all those scenes of being sort of bullied and and isolated by her peers and all that business with her mum as well. And sort of watching the remake not too long ago kind of didn't work for me because Chloe Grace Moretz, great actress, but she feels like a Hollywood actress, whereas Sissy Spacek had a much more down-to-earth, domestic, just sort of tragic way about her, which really made that film. And yeah, I think it's a real kind of timeless and just a different kind of movie altogether than the standard horror film that you might come to expect. There's a lot more to it, especially in like the emotional and the feels department. Someone else will be able to explain it a lot better than what I can. But in at number 2, we have Carrie White from Carrie. And in at number 1, the greatest horror character of the 1970s, we have Father Merrin, played by Max von Sydow in The Exorcist from 1973. I just love this character so much. I could have easily gone for Regan in this or Father Karras. In fact, Father Merrin's not in this movie all that much when you watch it, but he brings such a weight to the film. He kind of comes into the movie as sort of the hero, as the saviour, if you will. And the fascinating thing with that, the kind of the juxtaposing factor, is that he's a really old, tired man. Like, you know, he's really frail. And you just don't get characters like that in cinema now. Like nowadays, he'd be like a chiseled Jake Gyllenhaal kind of character. But no, in this one, he comes to us as a tired old man. But even so, you kind of you get the sense that he's been there, he's done everything, he's got a wealth of experience, and you just have faith that he can come in and exorcise Regan and defeat the demon. And of course, for me personally, that's what The Exorcist is about. It's about faith over the possession. And Father Merrin, despite his kind of elderly demeanour, you feel he can kind of bring that. And he's just absolutely captivating whenever he's on screen, particularly in the exorcism scenes themselves. Completely believable. And you're just sort of with him the whole time, hoping he can defeat the forces of evil. And yeah, I've always just kind of looked up to Father Merrin as this just amazing deity of a character. You know, a truly good guy on the force of good. And yeah, I just think it's a wonderful character. So yeah, my number 1 greatest horror character of the 1970s is Father Merrin from The Exorcist. So there we go, guys. That is my top 10 best horror characters from the 1970s. Let me know what you think of that, if you agree or not. If you don't, let me know what your top 10 best characters would be. I'd love to know. Stay tuned for the next episode. Next episode is the 1980s. Probably the hardest one to pick from. So yeah, that's definitely going to be an interesting list. So thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.